I am someone who really believes that we come with inherent knowledge in how to caregive, and we can refine our skills in caregiving. But, it's really up to you to, be of service in your community if you feel called to do this work.
Hi, I'm Maxie McCoy, and this has Never Been Asked, where I invite my guests to break out of whatever box they have been put in. My next guest is here to shift those boxes by protecting one of the strongest shifts in a person's life, the birth experience. Whether you ever plan on motherhood or you're already a birth or two in, this conversation will change the way you think about maternal care in this country. Please join me in welcoming globally recognized doula and best-selling author of Own Your Glow, Latham Thomas. Hi, Lath.
Hi, hon. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. You, I hope, know how deeply grateful I am for your friendship over the years. And I'm also sort of amazed at the gift of this lifetime of getting to have someone like you in it. And I truly mean that with no exaggeration. You are changing the world. You have a global doula education program. You have best-selling books. You write like a goddess. You speak like a goddess. You are a goddess. And you've also committed your life to birth equity and to reproductive justice. And I know that it'll be basically impossible to capture all of that in this one little conversation. But before we get into all of those things, I want to know, what's the thing that you've never been asked?
Wow, it's a great question. I talk a lot, whether it's publicly or within the context of some of our training programs, about my experience birthing my son, and which was life-changing and life-affirming and really set me along this path. And I do talk a lot about how my mother influenced me with her pregnancy with my sister, but I've never really been asked about my own journey earthside and my mother's birth experience with me.
What do you know about it?
I know that I was born in a time where ultrasound technology was really nascent. And so the entirety of the pregnancy, my mother was to believe that she was having a son. And it wasn't until the night before I was going to be born that she had a vision that came from her grandmother. And her grandmother had recently passed. And so she was sleeping and went to the kitchen. And there was like this really bright light coming out of the kitchen when she walked in, and she saw in her grandmother's writing in cursive on the wall the word girl illuminated. And she woke up the next day, because this was what she thought, like, sleepwalking, whatever. She saw this vision. And then, but she was very coherent in that it was like waking up and seeing that. And this ethereal experience led to the next day where she called everyone and said, "I'm having a girl. It's a girl." She used to call her grandmother Ma. And she said she visited, and it's going to be a girl. And so that afternoon, while my mom and dad were at a baseball game, my dad was umpiring, and her water broke. And she was like, "Oh, I think it's time to go have the baby." I was like really close to coming out as they were entering into the hospital. The doctor's name was Dr. Toomer. And he was basically sort of getting my mom settled into the room as I was emerging. She said it was very easy. And that she was like, "Oh, I could do this again. Like, that was so easy. That was so fast." And she said it was like an hour from when her water broke to when she had me, which she said we barely had time to get to the hospital. And so that was how it went.
The story is so beautiful. It wasn't probably until knowing you that I even thought to ask the question around like familial birthing stories. Why are they a good thing as women for us to know? Yours is so beautiful. I love that she thought you were a boy the whole time also. If we can just
Yeah.
stop at that. This is gorgeous.
Yeah, and they already had the name Latham anyway, so they just kept the name Latham.
Love it.
You know, it's really important to tell our stories for so many reasons. For location, right? Location in the body, in culture, in your community, in an awareness around where and whom you come from. It's an important aspect of us growing, you know, our own personal journeys to understand, you know, more of who our lineage, who and what make up our lineages. And it also helps us to understand how we're patterned. So one of the things that happens there's a genetic process that takes place. Obviously, we understand how DNA works and how it transfers information on a cellular level to carry out gene expression through your offspring, right? And so that might be seen visibly through eye color and hair texture and skin tone and, you know, cheekbones and lips and all these things that we can see visually, right? That you can see, oh, you got this from your mother, you got this from your father, or whatever. And then we also get to see, you know, personality traits. We also, what we don't get to see are other things we've inherited in terms of the experiences that our parents have gone through. So my mother's stress or anxiety or tension or fear, any trauma she experienced, that is all laced in her cellular body, right? And is passed down, right? As well as her resilience and her capability to overcome. That's also passed down. And so intergenerationally, we inherit things from our ancestors. And really, when we look at the maternal line, it's so important to understand that, you know, today we stand as people who were the cells inside of our mother's bodies when they were inside of our grandmother's bodies developing, right? And
that image, the first time I saw that image, like this is you inside your mother's womb, inside your grandmother. And I was like, oh my God.
yeah.
It had never dawned on me.
Yes, because you, during fetal development, all of the eggs that will ever exist in your body, which meant millions of which are shed before you're even born, those eggs are in development while inside the womb, right? And so just understanding that not just what your mother was exposed to, what your grandmother was exposed to, what your great grandmother was exposed to, like all of these things matter, right? And not just them, like every person who makes up your cellular DNA. We're talking about, you know, every aspect of what makes us uniquely who we are, right? Is touched by that. And so gene expression then comes, you know, can be supported, can be silenced by the circumstances we live through. And that's when we look at the epigenome, which really shows us the impact of lived experience and how that shows up in our bodies, whether that's weathering, whether that's resilience, whether that's disease, whether that's, you know, salud or health, right? And so those things are really important. And when you can know about your birth story, when you can know about the circumstances under which you were conceived, if you can learn about, like, you know, what the experience was like for you to get here, it tells you about a lot about your life, and it tells you a lot about the people and the resources that they had, you know, at the time. And also what we know is that, you know, healthy physiologic childbirth is really important to pattern us for resilience. It's really important to support the genes that we really do want to turn on, right? The gene expressions that we do want to come forth. And so having an experience where you feel safety and dignity and you feel honored in the experience versus one where you feel where that's traumatic or that's scary or that's undignified, right? Also will set off a certain neural pathways, but also turn on certain genes, right? And shut off certain genes. So that's why it's important too. It's important because we're talking about not just your life, but generationally where you sit in within an ecosystem.
Yeah. And it makes sense what you're saying too, as you think about everything that you've just shared. And I remember reading the story of you giving birth to Fulano and having the response, like, I have to protect this experience for women. And that is now your life's work. That protecting that experience is also what you're saying, right? Like the lineage of making sure that cherished, beautiful experience is happening from, obviously before day one, but the whole thing. Can you, to anyone who is listening to this and is not familiar with the work that you do, or even what the work of a doula is, can you educate those people for a minute and in what that actually means to doula this experience?
Yeah, so a doula is a non-clinical care provider who provides emotional support, physical support, education, advocacy, partner support, just really making sure that you're prepared for the experience you're going to endure. We're there to really make sure people understand how to navigate the choice that they've decided, whether it's a home birth, hospital, or birth center. Really there to make sure that people have the best resources available to them. Making sure that they have access to referral support when necessary, and really kind of helping them to design the birth village that they need to support themselves. This is critically important, especially in a time where people are really unclear about what their rights are as birthing people, really unclear about, how to navigate systems that aren't designed to support them. And these are, antiquated systems that are, rooted in patriarchy and white supremacy and all of its forms of sexism, homophobia, transphobia, fat phobia, ableism, obviously sexism, and ingrained in sort of gender-based violence, right, that occurs in these spaces. And so it is important to have someone who understands the social and political landscape, as well as the intersections that people might experience birth through those lenses, right? What are the lenses through which they might experience birth? And how do we make sure that they are honored in their experience and then they are supported? And so doula can do that. And you can be of any background, any age. And there are multiple types of training platforms and experiences out there. I am someone who really believes that we come with inherent knowledge in how to care give, and we can refine our skills in caregiving. But, it's really up to you to, be of service in your community if you feel called to do this work, and to not let the impediment of, a certification keep you from being active in advocating, in educating yourself, in educating folks in your community, so that you can do the important work that needs to be done. So I'm a huge fan of that as well.
Well, and you're doing it. You've made it so accessible to so many types of people in order to do it. How much has that shifted? I look at you and the work that you're doing with your very global doula program. You're training all kinds of people to protect this birthing process. And when you started this many years ago, was it something that was accessible? Was it hard for you to find your path in becoming the doula that maybe you didn't see?
For me, because I had my birth with midwives and my best friend was there, she was sort of my doula, and then my son's father. and then the midwives, and we just had like family who was hanging out at the birth center. I chose not to have the support because I had like 30, like 28 hours, I think, of education, almost like 30 hours of education, that was required of the place that I delivered. Like you could not deliver there unless you did the class.
Wow.
They offer, yeah. So it was like a weekly class. I did that. And it prepares you for what you're going to experience, right? It's childbirth education. And so there were a couple of people who reached out and said, "Hey, I want to be your doula." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I don't know." And I kind of felt like, well, I have a midwife, and I also,
What is the difference, Lath? I actually don't know the difference.
yeah. So a midwife is a clinical professional who is, skilled to deliver babies. They do all types of vaginal deliveries, including breech presentation. And the only thing that they don't do is surgical delivery, which an obstetrician does, right? And so obstetricians are essentially high stakes technicians, right? They are there to provide, surgical support, especially in instances where it's life-saving. And so, or if there's a threat to the life of the baby or the birthing person, they're there. So ideally, healthy people who are low risk could deliver with midwives in hospitals, at home, in birth centers. And people who are at risk, or whose births sort of turn the corner and may need some sort of surgical support, have an obstetrician. But the majority of people in the United States do see an OB/GYN during their pregnancies and deliver in hospitals. So we only have I think around 35,000 OB/GYNs in this country. Of that, 2% are Black women. And then we have about 14,000 midwives in this country. 6% are people of color, and also less than 2% of those people are Black women. Wow. So we need more midwives. Obviously, we need to get those numbers up, and we need more, obviously practitioners of color across the board. But those are clinicians that work alongside doulas, right? So doulas support in a non-clinical fashion, which makes the work really important, because we're looking at the emotional layer, right, of a person's life. We're looking at essentially everything that it takes to produce the experience, right? Like producing a birth, right? And so what does it mean to even do that? How do I show up and make this space more comfortable, cozy, beautiful? How do I make sure this person feels safety? How do I make sure that, I anticipate their needs, right? So we're doing all of those things. It's like having a coach, right? And so, inside of I guess a boxing ring, for instance, right? You would have referees, and then who sort of manage what's happening inside. But then you have the coaches who are on the sidelines, right? Yeah. Who are supporting, cheerleading, guiding, giving you the advice, right? And so it's sort of like that type of role of the coaching, of the cheerleading, the supporting, and the anticipating of needs.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. And thank you for letting me interrupt you to understand that difference. Because even though I've been around you for so long, I've never really dialed in on that. So I imagine other people may not know the difference also. So when you go back to your experience, you had done the classes, you had the hours, you had, your family and a specific midwife around you. So how did that, affect what you then, when you decided to get into this work, just how you've made it more accessible for other people?
Well, I think, being able to work alongside a midwife and also use Medicaid, because I was out of college. I was on my college insurance that had ended. And then, because I just graduated a year prior, so that ended. And so then they were like, "Oh, you can just join Medicaid." And I was like, "I could? Great." And so I got Medicaid, and I was allowed to see the midwives on Medicaid. And I also had $30 copays. It was awesome. And I could walk there to my appointments and stuff. It was only 7 blocks from where I lived. And so it was pretty amazing. So that accessibility factor was huge, being able to deliver where people were paying probably thousands of dollars, and I was like paying like $6, you know?
Yep.
And being a college, graduate, not having like a full, fledged career yet, it was really helpful because I was able to achieve the experience that I desired, and I wasn't sort of pigeonholed into choices based on my insurance type.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was amazing, like to have that kind of autonomy over the choices, and also, being able to have sovereignty over my body in the experience with the midwives was amazing. And I think, once my son was born, like 2 months afterwards, the practice shut down that he was delivered in. And it was because of new legislation and insurance premiums. The malpractice insurance premiums went like through the roof. And so because of that, places like our birth center could not stay open. They could not afford to carry the insurance. And as a result, what that did was that was the only freestanding birth center. We do not have any more like that. There's only one, there's like 3 birth centers in all of New York, right? That's crazy.
Yeah.
For these many people that we have, right? And then even with home birth, it's still like really challenging to navigate. And so we need to sort of, work to chip away at some of the impediments that exist, and the legislative barriers that exist that keep midwives from being able to practice, to be able to establish, birth centers in their neighborhoods and things like that. So something that I hope to be able to like work on as well. But, right now, for me, it's just about like making sure that our programs are accessible. We come in way under in terms of the fees for the training, so that people can afford it. And we have, scholarship programs, and we have payment plans and things like that to make it affordable for people, especially like during COVID. We really like, made it so people could really afford. And, it's like we subsidized a lot over the past year or so to support people, but we are also able to like expand the company like fivefold, during the pandemic, which is like not heard of for most companies. And so I feel really grateful to being able to do that. And I think that kind of, idea that there's always more, and that we can always, we can always make space for more, right? There's always more people. There's always more people that we can support. There's always room. If we think in this way, I think we can like, move towards solutions that like really impact our community in powerful ways. And so that's, I think, what we're trying to do is make sure that, through our programs, and, we're launching a foundation, and hopefully through that, we'll be able to do more as well. But I think, for me, it is really about, accessibility, but also more, we still need to like move laterally to make sure everybody knows this is an option, And that's the other thing too, is just more lateral education, more access in spaces that people don't expect. And and then, obviously working to make sure that we have legislative efforts that really match the work that's happening on the ground.
Our guests aren't the only ones who get to answer questions that they've never been asked. You can join in on all the fun. Go to womanoncollective.com/worksheet for questions you've never been asked. Because hey, newsflash, you don't need all the right answers. You need all the right questions. That's how you can take the inspiration from this episode and actualize it in your own life. So go on now. Questions for this episode that you've never been asked are waiting for you for free at womanoncollective.com/worksheet. What do those legislative efforts look like? I know that you and I, this is your work. And because I love you, I follow your work, and I have been so educated by the work that you do, even in, the risk of Black mothers, and, how they are dying in comparison to white mothers. And can you tell anyone, who's listening a little bit about what is actually going on in this country? Obviously, we know systemic racism is here on every dimension of life, but I don't think that people know how bad it is in maternal care, and how the doula work plays into being able to shift and advocate shift those realities.
Yeah. So we're in a place in this country that every year we're on an increase in maternal deaths, which is
It's getting worse
yeah,
every year.
it's inconsistent with other developed countries, that their maternal mortality rates are going down, right? And so that's a problem, especially since we spend more money per capita on healthcare, and because we have so much, so many medical advances to, really look towards, where it just doesn't make sense. Like, in so many other areas, we're really like advanced. And then you go to maternal care, and it's like, how is it possible that we don't have, coordinated efforts around responses to acute events, or, potentially lethal events that occur. And yeah, so a lot of people have what's called maternal mortality or morbidity, which looks at, someone who dies during or at the during childbirth or because of childbirth. And that death could also happen just within, it doesn't have to be like right there in the hospital. It could be like after the birth, right? You could be home already. So those deaths also count. And then near misses, right? And so, instances where something happened where it was like a close call, right? We count those as well. We don't have a formal way to like address what is actually happening, because every state and every city and every county and every hospital does things differently, measures differently, documents differently. There's no cohesive effort to centralize this data. And there's no reason to do so, because the people that are being impacted are not people who are considered valuable in this country, right? So that's why there hasn't been a massive effort to aggregate the data in a way that would create accountability, right? So when we're in a country where, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth, or childbirth related causes, than their white counterparts, it begs to question sort of like, what are we doing and what are we going to do, right? And so there's a lot of efforts around, education, trainings, anti-bias, anti-racism, all types of awareness trainings that can be interesting. But when we're talking about a system that's been like, 400 years of oppression we're talking about, you're not going to like unspin that in like a 2-hour lecture, right?
DEI training. Yeah.
So the problem really is also at the root of the system, which was, I would say, bolstered by and certainly institutionalized through the institution of slavery. Our medical advances in gynecology are directly correlated to the presence of bond women in slave hospitals whose bodies were being used for medical advancement and without anesthesia, although anesthesia was widely available at the time. These women were forced to endure all types of procedures and treatments, and when we go in for exams with our OBGYN, they're using a speculum, which was developed by J. Marion Sims, who was noted as a father of gynecology, who essentially, without consent, operated on and experimented upon hundreds and hundreds of Black female enslaved women, right? And so there's that there's never been a reckoning around that. There's never been a reckoning around, the forcible hysterectomies. There's never been a reckoning around, medical science and how they have treated, Black and brown people from everywhere. When we talk about this Tuskegee experiments to the Mississippi appendectomies to the women in Puerto Rico and birth control, there's so many things that we can look at to see where medical harm has taken place and medicine was not used to actually help people, but was weaponized. And so when we're talking about all of that, and then we're talking about a system where, people are not being seen or heard, they're not being recognized in their humanity or dignity. We're talking about people entering into unsafe spaces to deliver their babies and not having other alternatives. There has to be an alternative. There has to be that we build something else. And I really want that for healthy people, that they can have the option of birthing outside of the hospital. It doesn't have to mean that you're going home, but there should be places within your community that you should go. You should go for your well woman care with a midwife who then also delivers your baby, who then takes care of you postpartum. It's like, that's just how it was all the time. And that's how it should just be. Yeah. And so I think we need to sort of look to our ancestry for answers. And I think we need to, come together and really put these issues at the top of the feminist agenda. We put these issues into a framework that is about human rights, and not, a framework that is about a Black issue, right? Right. This is really a human rights issue, and it's a global human rights issue. Right. Like, this is not just happening in the US.
Obviously, there are embedded social justice issues into, the entire birth process that have to change and that we as a collective have to take on. And when we look at an individual level, one of the things, Latham, that you do so beautifully, and obviously that is the point of the work of a doula, is to help us advocate. So if there's anyone listening to this, and whether it's in the birthing process or outside of it, what are questions that we can ask when we're in a medical situation that help us advocate for ourselves?
Yeah, so understanding what consent looks like in the medical space is really important, so that you can understand the experience that you're having. You can have language for any normalized experiences that are harmful. So for instance, if someone says to you like, oh, it's okay that you're feeling that way as long as you have a healthy baby. Well, if I'm feeling something, it doesn't feel good, and there's something that can be done about it, but it's being dismissed because I should be happy that I'm going to have a healthy baby. It's not really addressing what's happening for me, right? So that's dismissing, right? And that's not validating my feelings, right? So that happens all the time. And it's not seen as abusive, but it is. It's violent to talk to people like that, because it's also gaslighting, right? Like, oh no, everything's cool. It's like, it doesn't feel cool, right? So having language for that and understanding, like, if you were in a relationship of any sort, if somebody was doing that to you, you would address it, right? Being in a situation where someone says, oh, we'll let you, move about the room, or we'll let you drink water, but we won't let you eat in the delivery room. Like, this language of like letting you or bossing you or having control over what you do is also not liberating, right? It's constrictive. It feels like I don't have agency in this process, or I don't have choice at all, right? That also is abusive, to talk to somebody in a way where like they're a child, and we shouldn't even be talking to children like that, right? Having an instance where someone starts to touch you to offer up a treatment or a procedure, and they haven't explained what they're going to do. And so you're just sitting there like, hey, what's happening? So you might like release your arm to have blood drawn, but nobody's talking to you about what they're going to do. Doesn't mean you're consenting to it just because you cooperate, right? Cooperation is often conflated with consent, right? And so the fact that I might, maybe release my legs open for a cervical exam or something like that, even though it hasn't been explained to me what's going to happen, doesn't mean I'm consenting, right? And so, there's really weird understandings of what consent looks like, and actually practicing, making sure that people understand a procedure, the nature of that procedure or treatment prior to someone starting it is really important, so that somebody can consent to it, right? So asking the questions: what is the nature of this procedure, right? What are the risks? What are the benefits? What are the alternatives? What if you didn't do this? What would happen, right? Like, is there something else that could be done? Like, we need to ask questions, because when we ask questions, we get answers. And those answers aren't always the answers that we want, because guess what? Somebody may not want to share that information with us because it behooves them for us to not know, or we would be easier to control if we didn't know, right? And so it's really important to be able to locate, what's happening in a conversation, where you're feeling small after a conversation, where you're feeling empowered. Am I being made to feel the best version of myself, the most powerful? When I walk into this room, do I feel belittled? Am I in a relationship where I don't feel safe, right? Do I feel like I have to walk on tiptoes or not upset my doctor? I've heard people say stuff like that. I'm like, excuse me, they work for you, right? Like flipping the relationship to one where they are not the authority. You're the authority of your body and your baby. Like, you're the one who's lived in this body the whole time, and you have better intel to be able to communicate what's going on for you to the physician, right? Like, they're a partner, right? Just like a doula is a partner in the process. They don't run the show, you run the show. And so when we think about patient-centric care and what it looks like, it doesn't look like a pyramid with a doctor on the top. It looks like a circle with a patient in the middle, right? And the baby in the middle. And then everybody else in rings around them, right? That is what the care is supposed to look like. And so we have to remodel the way that we've designed systems. We have to chip away at what is structurally already here and build something different, because what we have now does not serve. And although, yes, there are a lot of births that I attend that are happy, healthy, gorgeous, amazing inside of these spaces, but it is that we do so much work to make it so, right? We have to do so much work to make it comfortable. We do so much work to make it be exactly what that person wants inside of a space that's not designed for that.
Yeah. Versus that just being what is expected and the default. Like, it just is, it's wild how difficult we make these processes, like on, obviously it's because it's in a patriarchal system. And, even as I was thinking about in preparation for this conversation with you, like all of my stories from growing up, I mean, everything birth related is always about challenges and pain and trauma and recovery, like whether it's family stories or just stories at large that you learn as a woman about giving birth. And one of the beautiful things that you have managed to do in your work, and it's the thing that I admire about you so much, is you are holding space for the systemic issues and the pain and the trauma that is there in order to change it. And you hold space for so much joy of the process of birth and becoming a mother. And can you talk to us about that joy that actually can exist in the birthing process? And if anyone is listening to this, like how they can get themselves there. And as I ask this question, I'm reminded of a moment where I saw you and another woman who was pregnant, and we were at the same event, and she was having, anxiety and certain fears. And I remember just, kind of to the side, listening to you talk to her. And it was just immediately, you could tell her whole system was soothed. She was brought back to the joy of what she was about to experience just through your words. And I want to know more about that, like how we can all take ourselves into that joyful place with the situation, both a situation and a birthing situation, whether that's us doing that for our friends, whether it's us doing it for a family member or for ourselves.
Yeah. So, joy is really just like our birthright, and the birth experience itself is actually one that's meant to be mystical and beautiful and otherworldly, from the neurohormones to the ways that in which our body moves to sort of what's going on in our brains, and even the cocktail of hormones that the body secretes. All of it is really designed for bliss, for bonding, for safety, for this sort of hardwired primal experience that is sublime. It's supposed to be that, right? It's designed to be that, and so everything in our current medical model is set up to provide the opposite of what we need, right? The opposite of safety, the opposite of transcendence, the opposite of, comfort and security and community, the opposite of dignity, the opposite of, witnessing and love and compassion, and it's a transcendent event, right? And so all of these things are under threat in our current medical model. And so, in the way that we are designed, if we are allowed to be in our bodies fully, is to be able to intuit our needs from the movements, the sounds, the coping mechanisms that we need to birth our babies. Intuitively, we know what to do when unencumbered, right? And so the fact that like we're in a culture that is like post education, post information, right? This idea of like, not wanting to know things and just trusting that like it'll be okay or we'll figure it out when we get there. We cannot move in that kind of way when it comes to this process. You have to know so that you can be in a state of ease. And you also have to know so that you can be protected, right? And so when people have that ability to like work with, for instance, a doula who can help them get educated and prepare them for the experience, on the other side of that, like you can just slip into bliss. You can just be in the birth trance, right? And that's what I want for people. That's what I had. And so I want for people to be able to access that. And I want for people to know that like, all these stories that they're hearing that are bad and that are traumatic and intense, like it pains me actually to tell these stories. It pains me to share them on social media because it's like it's traumatizing for me to tell, right? And so sometimes I can't even do it the same day, or people will tag me and stuff like, "Did you see this?" I'm like, I'm trying actually not to see it, right? Because I know it exists and I work every day to sort of, do what I can to combat it. But I don't need to be reminded that these things are happening as much as we also do need to say these people's names, right?
Yep.
I just need to, be able to remind folks that that joy is on the other side, and joy is possible, and bliss is possible, and you can have a birth that is encoded with, with dignity and health and support and safety, and you can have an experience like mine where you felt your most powerful and most vulnerable at the same time. That is available to all of us. And so I always share that within the context of the doula training. I always share that within the context or spaces that I'm invited to speak about my birth story, because I do think it's important to remind people that, not all of us have had experiences that were harrowing. And we do need good stories to balance the fact that there are so many that are challenging and frightening. And I think that, it's important when people talk about being realistic, you know, um, being negative is not being realistic, right? And being positive is not being unrealistic, or sharing something positive is not ignoring the fact that there are things that happen every day that are out of our control, that are horrifying. But there are things that happen every single day that are beautiful and that we should lean into and uplift and celebrate as, this is like my vision for what I would want, right? To help us to figure out what that looks like for ourselves, to envision it. And so we need more of those stories to help us live into that feeling of what's possible, and to signal for us, and locate us with like a North Star, right? We just need that as people. You need hope. And that is what I hope we can do with storytelling that is positive. And one of my friends actually started a podcast called Birthright. And that's what they're going to be doing, is just all positive Black birth stories. And I think, again, so needed, right? We understand the statistics. We understand what's happening. We also need to understand there's positivity.
Yeah. And you are that positivity and the education and the hope. You are all the things. And I'm so grateful for you, Lath. Before we let you go, what are you batshit grateful for?
Wow. So I think a couple things, obviously family, especially in the time of quarantine. Very, very grateful for family. Thankful for heat. Thankful for heat. I've been sleeping with this, not sleeping, but like warming up for bed with this heated thing on my bed.
Love.
It's everything. I just lay on that. I'm just like
Send this human a link.
I'm like a hot dog on it, in the bed, like turning over and stuff. And I'm thankful for that, because, the winter is chilly, and, a lot of people are, housing insecure right now. A lot of people do not have the basics like water, heat, and shelter and food. And I do. And so I'm really thankful for even just the fact that I wake up and I have a place to be. So I'm really thankful, just, especially with everything that's going on with our siblings in Texas. And, it's just like alarming, what's happening in this country. And so it really makes you think about how precious the resources that we take for granted are. And so I'm thankful that I could get a glass of fresh water, that I could take a hot shower, that I could, turn on the heat and, not have to like burn, my personal items to get, heat from the fireplace. Like, I'm just thankful and really praying that, some solutions come for our siblings who are suffering right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mwah.